Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another episode of After the Buzzer, the show where I recap the NBA games from the night. We had 3 playoff games tonight, 3 Game 2s, Suns Timberwolves, Clippers versus Mavericks, and Pacers versus Bucks. A lot to go ahead and take away from these. We finally saw road teams win for the first time all playoffs, and there's one team that's down 0-2 that seems like they may be in an inescapable hole that could mean disastrous things for the franchise. So let's go and get into it. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. And as always, would love to hear your takeaways from these games. So let's kick it off with Game 2 of Suns versus Timberwolves. Coming into this series, this was a very popular upset pick, with the Suns, in a lot of people's eyes, being this nightmare matchup for the Timberwolves. That's a term that I even used in my series preview video. I was really back and forth on who I was going to pick, but ultimately I did pick the Suns to win for a number of reasons. Number one, the Suns won all 3 regular season matchups by a lot, which I didn't take fully into account, but it was something that I at least took a look at. They were also trending up. The Suns were playing their best basketball of the season down the stretch. Bradley Beal is really coming into his own with the team. You also the fact that Karl-Anthony Towns, one of the biggest cogs to what Minnesota does offensively, was coming off injury, and it was an injury that felt like it could hinder his mobility a little bit and make him a bigger target on the defensive end than he already was in a number of the matchups leading up to this game between these two teams. The Suns also played a style of ball that was very mid-range heavy, which felt like it could hit a couple of the weak spots in the Minnesota Timberwolves defense. These things all made it feel like it could be at least an interesting series, even if Minnesota won. Phoenix was a bad draw for them. However, so far it's been a slaughter. The first game was close for the first 18 minutes, with the Suns making it pretty interesting in the third quarter, until the Wolves turned it into a massive blowout, going up by 27 points and winning by 22. It was a bad game from Devin Booker. KD had 31, but struggled a lot with turnovers. He had like 5 or 6 in this game. And as a whole, they just couldn't consistently produce anything offensively against that insane Wolves defense, which showed exactly why it was number 1 in the world this season. Then you have tonight, where Game 2 followed a very similar script. The game was close for the first half. The Wolves started to pull away a little bit in the third quarter, and in the fourth quarter, annihilated the Suns, taking as much as a 19-point lead before winning by double digits. This time, it wasn't Anthony Edwards cooking them like he did in Game 1. It was an overall balanced effort. Jay McDaniels went off in this game for 25 points. This is the offensive jump I was hoping to see from him this season, and if he could somehow put together these type of games consistently, this Wolves team would reach a whole new level. So great things from Jay McDaniels, and of course great defense as he always plays. He's going to be on an all-defensive team, or at least in my opinion should be. You had 12 points from Karl-Anthony Towns, who also really held his own defensively. It was one of the better defensive games I feel like I've seen from him. 18 from Gobert, who is, as usual, ridiculous on the defensive end. He's going to win DPOY for a reason. It's nice to see a series where Rudy Gobert finally has competent perimeter defenders around him. He's erasing all these narratives that people say he's not a good playoff player, that he can't work in the playoffs, because now, unlike in Utah, where he was the lone line of defense, he's actually got a supporting cast on the defensive end. It's great to see. 18 from Mike Conley, who was an assassin in this game, really aggressive. Love to see that. And 10 from Nickeil Alexander-Walker, as well as 15 points from Anthony Edwards, and I think 8 dimes. He was really picking apart that Suns defense, doing a lot of great things playmaking-wise. It's been an evolution of his game where he's no longer just this microwave scorer. Instead, he can do a lot else, and he showed it in this game. The Suns' defense was better. Like, the Wolves didn't score a ton of points, but their offense just could not score against this suffocating Wolves defense, again, spearheaded by Rudy Gobert, as well as the great defense of basically everybody else on the roster tonight. This led to Phoenix turning the ball over 19 times, which comes eerily close to the number of threes that they attempted in this game, which was 22. Anytime you have that close of a margin between those two numbers, you're probably not going to win a lot of basketball games in the year 2024. They completely struggled to get any uncontested looks. Were getting run off the perimeter, and when they tried to go inside, Rudy Gobert was down low, as well as just the overall big bodies and length that the Wolves bring to the table. At the end of the game, they folded like they pretty much have all season. There's a reason they're by far the worst fourth quarter team in the entire NBA this season, and had a historically bad mark in those final 12 minutes. And with this loss, it puts them in a 2-0 hole, which isn't impossible to climb out of. We've seen it plenty of times, but Phoenix so far hasn't shown me many reasons to expect them to do so. Booker was better in this game, but throughout the first 2 games of the series has very clearly not looked like the all-NBA level player he was a lot of the season, and has failed a lot in that point guard role. He's one of the people they look to play that point guard, be that ball handler, to make plays happen for his teammates. Just hasn't done a lot of that so far, and it's not all his fault. Again, I'm not just hating on the Suns. I want to give a lot of credit to the Wolves defense, but if Phoenix wants any chance of winning this series, they need way better from from Devin Booker, as well as Kevin Durant, who did have a great first game, but was neutralized pretty heavily tonight, scoring just 40% from the field. Bradley Beal, meanwhile, the guy they went all in for this offseason, gave them just 14 points, shooting 35% from the field and turning the ball over 4 times. Another guy like Devin Booker, who they look to be this point guard, especially in crunch time moments. He just has not executed. Really, this entire big three has not been at the level they need to be to even make this a competitive series. They don't have much depth at all, so basically the big three has to carry them. They haven't been able to. Nurkic has really not stood a chance against the size of the Timberwolves. Grayson Allen was pretty invisible in game 1 and in game 2. Ended up hurting his ankle, leaving the game early. He's very important to everything they do. That reliable shooter that they didn't have last year in the playoffs. If Grayson Allen misses any time in the series, it may just be immediate game over for the Suns. They cannot afford any more losses to their depth, which is already incredibly thin. Frank Vogel is going to have his work cut out for him, trying to find ways for this team to adjust, but they're just very limited, and so far, at least through the first 2 games, I feel like he's been very thoroughly outcoached. They can only go as far as the big three takes them, and up to this point, Ant, Cat, and Gobert, the Wolves' big three, have outplayed them a ton. And the thing that the Wolves have that's a luxury is, even in games like tonight where Ant doesn't do a lot offensively, they have a Jaden McDaniels, a Nickeil Alexander-Walker, a Mike Conley. Cat as well can produce. The Suns just don't have that luxury. It was one of the big concerns this offseason with their roster construction, where it was the 3 guys at the head. Grayson Allen was like a fun 4th piece. Nurkic was a bit interesting, but everything else were just wild cards. They brought in a bunch of interesting players who felt like theoretically they could be good fits, but not many of them panned out. And now they are heavily reliant on their 3 score-heavy players that need to be hyper-consistent, facing a defense of extremely lengthy physical defenders. There's just, I don't think, enough talent on this team to overcome the gap between the squads. I've seen a lot of people point to the lack of a real point guard as the sole reason as to why the Suns are struggling like this. I don't think that's the case. I think the Minnesota Timberwolves are just doing a phenomenal job, although I think it certainly doesn't help them that they don't have a point guard, someone who can slow the game down, distribute in those final moments. I think it is a reason why they're so bad in the 4th quarter this year. And all of this has led to an avalanche from Minnesota so far. And I think it's going to continue. I don't think it's going to be a sweep. I do think Phoenix wins at least 1 game. It's very possible they push it to a 6 or 7. I honestly never know with Phoenix. They've been this wild card, heavily inconsistent the whole season, where some nights they look like world beaters, and some nights you wonder why this team was even constructed in the first place. I imagine the Wolves will probably win in 5 or 6 if I had to pick now. And while losing to a great Timberwolves team isn't the worst thing in the world, for Phoenix, losing in any round is disastrous, especially if they get humiliated, because where do you go from here? If they fall apart, if this continues, they have no real assets to upgrade this team. They gave up all their draft picks to make the Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant thing work over here in Phoenix to bring them in. They don't have pick swaps. Bradley Beal's a no trade clause as well, so they can't just deal him anywhere. They've got to find a spot that he wants to go if they decide to break up this big three. Durant is getting older, and he's a guy that has a history of trying to leave places, so we'll see what happens with him. I'm sure Devin Booker is growing impatient and might look at this overall situation he's in now in Phoenix and say, I'm in trouble because I don't know how this team gets better with me in town. How do you build a contender when everything that they need to do to get there feels so unbelievably far away? There's just no way to upgrade this roster to the level of some of the best teams in the Western Conference unless your big three just goes on a ridiculous tear for a full playoff run. It's going to be very interesting to see how they respond, but for the moment, they're in a lot of trouble. They have to battle back in Phoenix. They need to hope Grayson Allen isn't hurt, get way better performances from Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, and Bradley Beal. Frank Vogel's got to make some adjustments. They have to figure out how do you consistently score against this Minnesota defense. And honestly, the answer may be they just can't. Maybe they're just not able to take out one of the most dominant defenses we've seen in recent history. I wouldn't blame them if that's the case. Like, they are special on that end. But for Phoenix, failure isn't that much of an option. They have to try and find some way to bounce back. And honestly, through the first 2 games, haven't shown me a lot that makes me think that they will. Let's move on now to the other 2 games, beginning with Dallas versus the Clippers. This was a game that saw the return of Kawhi Leonard for the first time in about a month, and with him coming back and the Mavs being down 0-1, it felt like a sort of must win. Of course, it wouldn't mean the end of a series, but they really, really needed this one in my opinion, and they went ahead and got it done, tying up the series 1-1 in a 3-point win in what was a very ugly game. Neither team led by double digits the entire night. Both teams shot very poorly at 42 and 37% on the game. The key for me was the tough shot making down the stretch of Luka and Kyrie, as well as timely buckets from the role players. Role players that weren't really hitting their shots in game one. That was something I complained about in my overall game one breakdown video, but in this one, they stepped up specifically. PJ Washington and Maxi Kleber, both of them hit huge threes in the final few minutes, and in addition to that, Kyrie Irving went on a personal 5-0 run in the back half of the fourth quarter, and Luka Doncic hit a huge step back three to put the Mavs up 9 with 90 seconds left, a play that proved to ultimately be kind of a dagger. The Clippers kept trying to punch back, but ultimately the Mavericks defense held really strong. Specifically, I want to give a lot of credit to Luka Doncic. All season, people have been preaching how he's an improved defender, and I still don't think he's great, but he's definitely improved on that end for sure. And in this game, you could see that because the Clippers were basically running the game plan of you get Luke on a switch, attack him. And they were trying over and over and over again to score on him. And Luke was making that look like a ridiculous plan because he was putting the clamps on basically anybody and everybody who tried to score against him tonight. I saw a stat, I think it was like the Clippers were 1 of 12 from the field or something similar to that when trying to score on Luka. That's incredibly impressive for a guy that for most of his career has been looked at as a big negative on that end, and a guy that again was being targeted. He was signaled out as the player to attack, and he made them pay every single time. Huge stuff from Luka, a great defense as well from like PJ Washington. Kyrie Irving is really growing on that end too. They just did a great job of clamping up. Luka finishes with 32, 6, and 9. Kyrie with 23, 6, 3, and 3. And PJ had 18 and 6. They're going to need more of this. The Clippers, with Kawhi Leonard coming back, I think are only going to get stronger and stronger as it kind of refines his form. Wasn't great in this game. 7 of 17 shooting, 0-5 from 3, just 15 points. Did have 4 steals and had some big moments here and there. But as Kawhi Leonard gets more and more comfortable, the Mavericks are going to have to be better and better. And I think this is a huge momentum win for them to give them at least a tied series going back to Dallas. Outside of Kawhi Leonard in this game, PG was solid, 22 points, 2 rebounds, and 4 assists, 50% shooting. Harden was just 2 of 10 from 3. Norman Powell was 2 of 10 from the floor, and Russ was 2 of 9. They really just did not have the offense going tonight. Like I said, huge credit to that Mavericks defense and everything they did, and the Clippers just kind of seemed out of sync. Maybe it was the return of Kawhi Leonard that threw them off a little bit, and I think they'll ultimately be fine, but they do need Kawhi Leonard to eventually find a rhythm if they want to take down this juggernaut Mavericks squad. Finally, we had Pacers versus Bucks, and this one was the big blowout of the night in favor of Indiana. They go ahead and win on the road, taking the series 1-1 back to Indianapolis. The big hero in this game was Pascal Siakam. The Bucks, like I said in my series preview video, don't really have an answer for him because you would imagine it would be Giannis on that end, but with him not playing, Pascal doesn't have a lot of resistance. And in this game, well, first of all, in game 1, he was amazing, but this game, even better. 37, 11, and 6 on 70% shooting. Nobody could stop him. And it wasn't just him killing them down low. It was also like Miles Turner, 22 points, 7 rebounds, and 6 assists. Aaron Nesmith had 11, Andrew Nembhard had 20. The threes started falling for the Pacers in this game last contest. They were getting a bunch of wide open looks that typically they knock down, and they just weren't falling, and it felt like they were due for some regression to the mean. We saw that in this game where they just torched the Bucks from the outside, shot 44% from deep. They put on a masterclass. Really, the only thing that didn't go great for them was Tyrese Haliburton wasn't fantastic. 12 points, 4 rebounds, and 12 dimes. It's definitely not a bad stat line by any means, but I do still think Tyrese is being a little bit too passive. It feels like he's really worried about making the right play every single time, and you know that's good that he's being conscious about that, but I do want to see a bit more of an aggressive Tyrese Haliburton, especially when Giannis comes back. They're going to need a lot more out of him because Pascal isn't going to be able to do the same stuff that he's doing now if Giannis ends up back on the court. So that is one concern for the Pacers, but overall thought this was a huge bounce back, commanding victory for them. And for the Bucks, splitting the series 1-1 without Giannis isn't the worst case scenario, but it is still scary because we still don't know when Giannis is going to be back. Maybe he comes back for game 3, but if he doesn't, that gets really scary. And now when you're going into Indiana, the Pacers are probably going to have even more luck with their shooting. Typically, role players do play better at home. Dame again started great in this game, but disappeared in the second half. Portis had just 6 of 16 shooting from the floor. He has to be a lot better than this. They cannot afford him to struggle offensively if Giannis isn't on the court. Middleton was just 6 of 14. They really miss Giannis on both ends, offensively and defensively, to slow down Siakam, give them a consistent guy attacking the rim, overall consistent pressure. Again, he destroyed the Pacers in the regular season. We'll see if he ends up coming back anytime soon. If he does, I think the Bucks are still in a good spot. But if he doesn't, the Pacers may have found a rhythm here that could make this a very quickly snowballing series in favor of them. But with all that being said, those are my thoughts on these 3 playoff games. Let me know down below in the comments what your takeaways were, your overall thoughts, your impressions, who impressed you the most, who was disappointing, and what do you think about the Phoenix Suns in particular? Can they come back from being down 0-2? Kevin Durant and Devin Booker said after the game, don't worry, we're going to figure this thing out. Do you think that they can? And if they don't, what do they do in the offseason? Where do they go from here? Is there any way you think they could upgrade? Should they trade their big 3, rebuild? Would love to hear your thoughts on that and just any of the series as a whole. Love talking playoff hoops with y'all, but for right now, I appreciate y'all watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. All the same stuff. I'll see y'all later. Everyone say it back.